All right. So in 2 Samuel chapter 3, all right, we're going to deal with the first part on the long war for control. And this is the war between the house of Saul and the house of David. And now last week, is it last week? Yeah. Okay. Last week we dealt with David's ascension to the throne and how, in the midst of all that, there was a skirmish and battle that broke out between those who were loyal to Abner and those who were loyal to Joab, right? And in the midst of that, there was a massacre, and then Abner found himself running for his life, right, running to safety, and he was being chased by Asahel, right, the youngest brother of Joab, and this led to, and he was very fast and persistent and was catching up. And so this led to Abner trying to defend himself. And in the process, Asahel was killed, right? Not by the front end of his spear, but by the back end of the spear. And as a result, it led to a standoff because Abner and his surviving men and the Benjamites, they gathered, as reinforcements, right? They're gathered around Abner on one hill, right? Joab and his men gathered on another hill, and they faced off against each other. Now, there was a point of decision to be made, because if they were to continue to escalate this, it is going to lead to a civil war between both sides. And, this is to go brethren against brethren, tribe against tribe in Israel. Now, that was actually contrary to God's laws, and they were warned, had been warned in the scriptures against doing that. Okay, and then even in any home or family, brothers and sisters don't fight each other. Okay, and what happened was at that point, Abner reminded Joab, right? He says, "You really want to do this? Are we going to be killing each other here? All right? Is this bitterness is going to continue and to be prolonged?" And so at that point, what you can see here in verse 27, chapter 2, was that you see the right words, right, spoken at the right time. It's going to force people to think. Okay, now why were they not thinking in the first place? Because they were being led by the heat and the passion of their emotions, right? And whether you are the aggressor or you are you're the victim or the one defending yourself. Now, our passions, the heat, all right, of our emotions can get the better of us. And at this point, Joab actually acknowledges, right? It says, "As God liveth, unless thou hast spoken, surely then in the morning the people had gone up, every one from following his brother." And so, if he didn't step in to say this, now, notice, now I want us to think about this because I think that there are points of application here. Because how did Abner deal with this? By asking questions. Right? Look at verse 26 again. "Shall the sword devour forever? Right? Knowest thou not that it will be bitterness in the latter end? Right? How long shall it be then, ere that thou bid the people return from following their brethren?" Okay? In other words, are we going to keep killing each other? Right? Don't you know what the end result will be? Right? How long are you going to keep doing this before you tell your people to stop, right? Stop chasing after and pursuing their own brothers, right? Because that's who they are, right? They are members of the other but different tribes of Israel, but they are not, these are not Philistines. These are not the enemy, right? They do have a disagreement. They do, supporting different factions, but end of the day, they are the children of God. They are, right, Israel. They're supposed to be one nation. And so what Abner did was to ask questions. Now, why is that important? Okay, now, because by way of application, even for us, questions are important because when people are hot, all right, and they're carried away by their emotions, all right, they stop thinking. And the way you get people to think, okay, one very good way is to ask questions. Why? Because they have to pause, they have to process what you've said, they have to think about the question, all right? And this, now, if you lay the right kind of questions, what happens? They can be self-convicting questions, okay, that are going to get people to like, hey, wait a minute. And so what happens? At this point, everything pauses, right? And then Joab blows his trumpet in verse 28, right? Calls off this chase. And then so both sides now go their own way, right? They have to bury their dead, right? Deal with the casualties and all this kind of stuff, right? But, okay, in doing so, they averted a civil war, okay, which could have gone very badly for everyone. Okay, so the thing, also the other thought here is this. Someone may have started the fight. All right, so the question we have to deal with is, should we be the ones to finish the fight? Because sometimes the better way of dealing with it, okay, and I'm not saying it's easy, which is why it's very important that the heat of the emotions, okay, are dealt with, right? Things settle down. Otherwise, what happens is that we don't think clearly, right? Because it is still a personal choice whether we take up the fight and we continue with it. Someone may have started it, all right? And I'm not saying you cannot defend yourself, all right? And Abner, in fact, defended himself, okay? It was self-defense. Asahel died as a result, okay? But you can see everything that Abner is doing is focused on trying to avoid, all right, escalating this and making it worse. Okay, now Asahel was very persistent in chasing, in chasing Abner because he was looking for a trophy, right? And in killing Abner, he would be able to bring back for himself, right? Abner's personal armor, all right, that would have been a trophy. You know, he had scored some major points, right? In particular, as the youngest brother, the baby brother of the group, okay, he might have felt the need to prove himself, right, at Abner's expense. But, you know, Abner being the more experienced fighter and soldier, you know, Asahel was no match. And sadly, he paid the price because he died in the process. And he died quite horribly because with a spear sticking out of him. All right? Now, so we come to in chapter 3, now there is a war for control and this is going on back and forth. Okay, now look at verse 1. It says, now there was long war between the house of Saul, all right, and the house of David, but David waxed stronger and stronger, and the house of Saul waxed weaker and weaker. Now, so we see the ascendancy of David's reign. Okay, here we see that there is a battle, all right, and both sides they're getting stronger. Okay, the forces and those who are with David, even though they are outnumbered. Okay, remember only one tribe, the tribe of Judah, stands with David, while the rest of the other 11 tribes, right, stand against David. Okay, but here you see two factions, right? There's one nation, but two factions. Okay, the house of Saul versus the house of David. Now, you can see, yes, in the case of a nation, in the case of politics, you know, there's often this kind of dynamics at play, right? Because why? that is the case with the world. There's a case with kings and governors. They rule using the exercise of power. Now, Jesus pointed out to the disciples, it shall not be so among you. Why? Because it is not to be by power, right? Or by politics, okay? But by service. Okay, John chapter 13 now. There was arguments about who is the greatest among the disciples. Who's going to get to sit at Jesus' right hand when he comes into his kingdom. All that. And what did Jesus do? He basically, girded himself. He started to wash the feet of the disciples that evening in John 13. And he laid that as an example to all of us. Now, but here, the way of the world is different. Okay? And so there is a struggle for power. There's a struggle to see which one is going to be stronger. But you'll see here that the house of David got stronger and stronger, but the house of Saul became weaker and weaker. Now, the interesting part about this is going to be that this is not by diplomacy or by politics and all that David got stronger. Right now, you turn to Psalm 75, verse 6 and 7, because we need to see one thing here, that when it comes to us as God's people, this is not how it works. Right? Here it tells us, for promotion cometh neither from the east, nor from the west, nor from the south. But God is the judge. He putteth down one and setteth up another. Right? So God is the one, right, who is judge, who is king. Now he is the one. It's not going to come from the east or the west. Right? God is the one that can elevate and raise someone up or bring someone down. Okay, so you're going to see here that the rules and the way God works is different. Now, King Nebuchadnezzar found that out the hard way, all right, in Daniel chapter 4. And when you look at verse 37 of Daniel 4, now Nebuchadnezzar gives testimony concerning the Lord and says this, now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, all whose works are truth, and his ways judgment. And those that walk in pride, he is able to abase. And he learned the hard way, right? Because of his pride, he lived for, I think it was 1 year, where he lived just like an animal, and the hairs of his body were overgrown. He lived like a beast. Because, right, he would not give God the glory. Okay, now, this growing in strength and all that. Now, there are two ways to do this, right? You either do it God's way or we do it the world's way. Now, the world's way is what? By the exercise of power. Now, that is not for us. Okay? Same thing even in a New Testament church. Now, in terms of authority, in terms of, just getting things done or whatever, it's not by by wielding and exercising power. It is not by making people, right, do stuff. Now, so many times this is what people assume. Okay? And that's because if you and I think like the world, that's our conclusion, how things are going to work. Okay, I've lost count of the number of times people, they expose themselves, reveal how they really think and what they are all about. When they will come up and they will, even though God works out certain things, right? But they'll come up and they'll accuse me, right? Oh, Pastor did this and did this, and then he maneuvered this way and that way. And you know what? You have no idea what you're talking about. Okay, you're making assumptions based on how you would do things, and that's not how it works. Okay, and certainly not how things should work in a New Testament church. Okay, and you can see here, David didn't have to do all those things. All right, but as things worked out, the house of David waxed stronger. Now remember, which was the stronger group? It would have been those who were on Abner's side, right? Backing and supporting King Ishbosheth. Why? There were 11 tribes. Okay, so if you just think in terms of the population base, know that this would have been the far stronger group and alliance, right? They definitely outnumber David, and then in terms of resources and all that. But what is happening instead is that as the reality, right, the reality of this plays out, what you can see is that this is probably a very loose and also very weak alliance, even though it may be outwardly strong in terms of numbers. Okay, now, so that's why one of the things I think we need to see also is that numbers don't always tell us everything. All right, and don't be fooled by that. Okay, numbers and budgets, they don't tell us the whole story. All right, now move on, because we also see the additions to David's family. Verse 3, and his second, I'll read from verse 2. And unto David were sons born in Hebron, and his firstborn was Amnon of Ahinoam the Jezreelitess, and his second, Chileab of Abigail, the wife of Nabal, the Carmelite, and the third, Absalom, the son of Maacah, the daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur, and the fourth, Adonijah, the son of Haggith, and the fifth, Shephatiah, the son of Abital, and look at verse 5, and the sixth, Ithream by Eglah, David's wife. These were born to David in Hebron. Okay, now, we see here, there is a list, right? It documents for us in these verses, David's 6 wives. Now, David has 6. No, he doesn't have 6. He has 7 wives, right? But 6 of them are documented here. Okay. Now, when you look at the scriptures, okay, now what happens with every one of the wives, okay, a child was listed. Right here, I think these are all the sons. The sons were mentioned here. But realize this, yes, children are a blessing. Right? Psalm 127, verse 3 and 4 tell us, lo, children are an heritage of the Lord, and the fruit of the womb is his reward. Okay? It's a reward from the Lord. It says, as arrows are in the hand of a mighty man, so are children of the youth. Now, but as much as that is the case with regards to children, now we need to realize Psalm 127 and also correspondingly Psalm 128 now are in reference to a man who has one wife. Okay, not a whole bunch of them. Because God's plan and design has always been one man, one woman for life, till death do us part. Okay, here, what you can see is the first 2 that were mentioned, okay, were Ahinoam and Abigail. Now, these were the ones the wives that he had while David, right, was in the time of David's life when he was on the run and in the wilderness. Okay, now who was his first wife? Okay, she's not mentioned in these verses here, but it's Michal. Right, that was the wife that who was the daughter of Saul, whom he had married. Okay, but then after that, when he went on the run, that was when Ahinoam was added, and then later Abigail. Okay, now I think it's interesting when you look at the way the text lists them out. Right, it lists so and so, and all that. Right, it says, like, for instance, Absalom, the son of Maacah, right? Adonijah, the son of Haggith, right? Ithream, the fifth, right? Shephatiah, the son of Abital, and so on and so forth. Now, this so and so is the name of the son and the son of so and so, which is the name of the wife. But then when you get to verse 3, we see that Chileab was mentioned here, but then it says Abigail, who is here actually described as not the wife of David, but this is the wife of Nabal the Carmelite. Okay, I thought that was rather interesting. All right, because later on, even in the, I think it was in the one of the genealogies, you'll see something like that also mentioned, where it mentions Bathsheba, who is the wife of, okay, the whole point being that it is not the wife of David. Okay, but anyway, it's just a thought here to think about. But here, now the other additional wives, it came into the picture after David has settled into Hebron. Right, so Maachah, Hagith, Abital, and Eglah, and so he's multiplied the number of wives. Now, among them, you see the sons. The notable ones were Amnon, right, his firstborn, and Absalom, right, the third son. Okay, why? Because one of them, Amnon, became notorious down the road because he raped his half-sister, right, the sister of Absalom. And in turn, what happens? Absalom murdered Amnon in revenge and then later staged a coup against his own father. Okay, we see the king of Geshur mentioned, right? Talmai, the king of Geshur, all right, and okay, at the time, okay, so David married Talmai's daughter. Most likely, this was a political marriage, all right, very often to secure either alliances and loyalty. Why? Because the logic is like this, right? The king is unlikely to attack a country, right, and risk his own son or daughter being taken hostage or being killed as a result of the war, right? And so when they exchange sons and daughters like that, okay, through marriage, this is to buy security, to ensure that there's peace with that particular country, and okay, and sometimes it's by a mutual exchange. So anyway, Talmai, right, the king Talmai, now this is the grandfather of Absalom. Now, what does God think about all this? Now turn with me to Deuteronomy 17. Look at verse 15 onwards. Now it says here, Deuteronomy 17 verse 15, it says, "Thou shalt in any wise set him king over thee, whom the Lord thy God shall choose." Now, it's very interesting that even though it was never God's plan nor desire for Israel to ever have a king, but in giving the law of Moses, God also laid down some rules and laws, right, to constrain and restrict, okay, in terms of the behavior, the conduct of the king, what the king of Israel should be doing, should they ever rebel against God in wanting and demanding a king. Right? He puts those in as a safety measure, okay, and by the foreknowledge of God, God knowing that someday they will want to demand a king, even though God never intended for them to have a king. All right, that's why when they first occupied the promised land, right, in the book of Judges, you're going to see they were actually, Israel had judges, but no kings, no rulers. Why? Because God was to be their king. And the laws come from God rather than from man. Okay, but you see, when they wanted a king and they told Samuel, to give us a king, we want a king just like all the nations around us, right? We want a king that's going to pass laws, okay, for us, right? We want men to pass laws. We want men to decide what is right and wrong rather than God. Okay, but here in Deuteronomy 17, now God lays out the instructions concerning what the king should do. Now, it tells them that this, set him king over thee, whom the Lord thy God shall choose. All right, so one that God will allow them to have. Is it one from among thy brethren? So one shall thou set king over thee. Thou mayest not set a stranger over thee, which is not thy brother. So what do we see? In verse 15, the law of God states, right, that this will be, it cannot be a foreigner, right, not a stranger, but a Hebrew, right, one who is one of their brethren, okay, homegrown, so to speak. And then look at verse 16, right? But he shall not multiply horses to himself, nor cause the people to return to Egypt, to the end that he should multiply horses. For as much as the Lord has said unto you, right, ye shall henceforth return no more that way. So we see here that this king is to trust in God's strength rather than in military might. Right? Not to trust in the wealth, nor in the wealth of resources, right? Not in finances, nor in the wealth of resources. Okay? Not to, just like in the case of Egypt, right? Which is a picture and it's representative of the world. Okay? He is also not to lead Israel physically back to Egypt. Now, verse 17 then tells us, okay, not only that, it says this king, right, says, neither shall he multiply wives to himself, that his heart turn not away. Neither shall he greatly multiply to himself silver and gold. All right, so he's not to be a king that's covetous, or focused on wealth. You see, because the king that God is looking for should be one that is going to profit the nation rather than himself personally. All right, not to multiply wives, okay, which David had done. He said the danger was that they said that his heart turned not away. All right, the danger was turning away their hearts because of the wives. Okay, and we're going to see when a man listens to his wife more than he listens to God, there's going to be trouble. Okay, we're not saying that a husband should not listen to his wife. But when you do that at the expense of God's authority, right now, even though David, generally that was not the case with David. Okay, his son wasn't quite as strong as David. All right, and Solomon, it was said that all these wives, all these strange wives that he had, what happened? They turned his heart, all right, away from the Lord, especially in his old age. Now, the king is not to be covetous, not to be coveting not wealth, not to be coveting wives and women. And then verse 18 tells us he is to be rather a student of God's word. Verse 18, and it shall be when he sitteth upon the throne of his kingdom, that he shall write him a copy of this law in a book, out of that which is before the priests, the Levites. Okay, imagine, no one is allowed to sit down and write and copy the scriptures on behalf of the king. All right, basically it's a case of the king, well, you're going to have to do your own homework. All right, no one is supposed to help you with this. Now, he's supposed to copy, right? He's supposed to have his Bible, and how is he going to have that? By copying it. All right, personal copy, all right, that's going to help him to remember, right, to read, to fear God, to keep God's laws and statutes. Verse 19, and it shall be with him, and he shall read therein all the days of his life. So verse 19 tells us what? That the scriptures, okay, he's going to have to keep a copy of it by his side. All right, it's going to be accessible. It's there when he needs it. He will read it all the days of his life. So it's not just a one-time thing. You continue to read it, to be familiar with it, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God. You see, it's the way of a human king to want everyone to fear him. But what God is looking for is a king who fears God. Right? So to keep all the words of this law and these statutes, to do them. Right? That his heart be not lifted above his brethren, and that he turn not aside from the commandment to the right hand or to the left, to the end, that he may prolong his days in his kingdom, he and his children in the midst of Israel. So it's to keep him humble. How? By staying in the word of God. Right? Because God is going to judge the king, all right, and any other ordinary man in the kingdom, all right, in the same way. Okay, now, we're going to move on very quickly to see not only were there additions to David's family, we see the application of Abner's power. Now look at verse 6 and 7. And it came to pass, while there was war between the house of Saul and the house of David, that Abner made himself strong for the house of Saul. Okay, so Abner strengthened himself. He consolidated his power. All right, now this is for good intentions. Okay, because this is for the sake of the house of Saul. But the problem with power is at some point, okay, because we're human beings, it corrupts. And we see the application of that power. How? For personal benefit. All right, because here Abner decides, okay, yes, I'm doing this for the sake of the house of Saul, to strengthen the house of Saul. But look at verse 7. It went beyond that. All right, there is an overreach of that authority and power. Here it says, and Saul had a concubine whose name was Rizpah, right, the daughter of Aiah. And Ishbosheth said to Abner, wherefore hast thou gone in unto my father's concubine? Now, we're going to see here the issue. Okay? Ishbosheth, who is the king, understood the implications of what Abner did. Okay? Why? Because in going in onto his father's concubine, in other words, Abner decided that he was going to, now I don't know whether this was a love affair or not, but Abner decided he was going to sleep with Rizpah, right, the concubine of Saul. And Ishbosheth understood the implications of this. Because for a man like Abner to lie down, right, and to have sex with Saul's concubine, this is as good as now notice this is as good as Abner claiming the throne for himself. Because you think about this, who is the person who has the right to do this with Rizpah? King Saul, not Abner. Okay, not even Ishbosheth, right, would dare to do this. But what happened was, Abner decided, well, he's gonna claim, right, Rizpah for himself. And so he decided to help himself to her. Now, Ishbosheth saw that, he knew about this, and he took a very dim view to this. Okay? But here's what's happening, right? He is, flexing his muscles. Right? He covets the power, he exercises it. Now, you think about this, who is able to take liberties with this kind of thing? Whoever's the master, whoever's the owner. Example, if there is a car, now, if I'm the owner of the car, I can do whatever I like. I can change the color, I can take it out anytime I want, I can drive it around. But if it's not mine, it's a different story. Okay? So he is acting as if he is the master, right? He's the king rather than Ishbosheth, and he's taking liberties with Saul's concubine Rizpah. Okay? Now, but this is not just merely a case of a man who is lusting after a woman. Okay? Because there is an implication, because in terms of who he went after, right? It is an attempt to wield power, and this is symbolic. Okay? At the same time, Ishbosheth is also upset because, right, it shows a lack of respect for King Saul, who is deceased. Okay? Now, if you look at Genesis chapter 35, verse 22, we'll see an example of this when Reuben, right, the son of Jacob, as the firstborn, he decided to do something like that. Now, Genesis 35, verse 22, and it came to pass when Israel dwelt in that land that Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard it, right? That's Jacob. Now the sons of Jacob were 12. So why did Reuben do that? He went in to stake his claim that he is the future leader and the successor of Jacob, his father. And so, because of that, he somehow he felt entitled to his father's concubine, that he could do whatever he wanted with her. Okay? Now that, when Jacob found out about it, now he was very, very cheesed off. Okay? And you're going to find that, in fact, Reuben, in so doing, right, there were long-term implications. Reuben actually pretty much lost his, was no longer qualified, okay, to lead among his brethren. And it later will be Judah that will be the one, rather than Reuben. Okay? Now, you see this also in 2 Samuel 16, verse 21, concerning the counsel given by Ahithophel, right, to Absalom. And Ahithophel said unto Absalom, go in unto thy father's concubines, right? 2 Samuel 16, verse 21, which he had left to keep the house, and all Israel shall hear that thou art abhorred of thy father. Then shall the hands of all that are with thee be strong. Again, was what? To lay claim on the father's concubines, right? And it's a way of Absalom announcing to all of Israel, hey, I'm the one in power now. I'm the king, right? It's not David anymore. Okay, so just one more example, right? We see this in 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 21. Okay, now this is Queen Bathsheba, right, going to her son Solomon, and she's making a request on behalf of Solomon's brother. Look at verse 21. And she said, let Abishag the Shunammite be given to Adonijah, thy brother, to wife. Okay, now, Solomon's brother asked for Abishag, right, who is the concubine, right, and consort of King David. Now, and this is after David was gone. Right, he requested for her to be given to him as a wife. Now, she was a young woman. David was very old. David did not have any, was not involved with her sexually, whatever. They actually, the advisors and all that in the court suggested that here a young woman like Abishag should be given to David so that she could keep him warm, right? And because, and he said, as David lay in bed, now he could no longer, his body was getting cold, right? And then so she was there to minister to him in that way. Now, what happened was, okay, now, so Solomon's brother requested for her to be given to him as the wife. Now, Solomon immediately upon listening to this request understood the implications. Verse 22, and King Solomon answered and said unto his mother, and why dost thou ask Abishag the Shunammite, right, for Adonijah? And ask for him the kingdom also, for he is mine elder brother, and even for him and for Abiathar the priest and for Joab the son of Zeruiah. Now, King Solomon, in telling Bathsheba this, he's saying, why are you asking, for Abishag to be given to my brother as wife? You might as well just ask for me to hand the kingdom over to him also. Why? Because whoever gets to get Abishag as wife, okay, now this is symbolic of being the king. Right? And Solomon saw that. Now, Abner was wielding that kind of authority and power, right? Because he felt entitled, right? That he's now the real power behind Ishbosheth's throne. He's the one who can make him king. He can elevate Ishbosheth. He can also bring him down. Okay, now you contrast it to what we read earlier when even in Daniel 4 verse 37, it was Nebuchadnezzar that realized, God is the one that can raise someone up. He can bring someone down. Okay, but Ishbosheth basically is learning that he would do well to be careful about Abner, because Abner, can do whatever he likes. Now, when a person decides that they can do whatever they like, usually that's because they believe that they are above any other authority, and there is no power authority that is above them. Okay, and now we got to realize here that here was a deadlock, right? You got the house of David and the house of Saul, right? And there's the struggle for power. Okay, and as long as this situation exists, right? Now, Israel cannot face their external enemies, the Philistines, or any other group of people, okay, or any other nation. But here you see an example of, Abner is an example of those that work behind the scenes, right, as a power broker. And sometimes you get to see these characters also in the church, right? They can make or break someone. They are the ones that may wield the power or whatever silently, because you see here Abner, for instance, he has all his contacts. He's been able to send messages to all the different tribes of Israel, right? He has all these. He's very well connected, right? He's very influential. And what more if Abner could just help himself to the king's concubine? Okay, and so this sets up a situation where there is going to be at some point a showdown, right? And Ishbosheth is very concerned. Why? Because Abner is looking like he is getting very ambitious. He's overstepping his authority. Okay, and I want us to realize here that if you look at this human nature, right? People who do that, okay, in their own estimation, in their own minds, right? They have grown in terms of their power, their reach, their authority, their influence, and so they believe that they are immune to consequences. They can do, because right, they can do anything they like and they will be able to get away with it. Okay, same thing you got to see. Now, you notice it didn't matter to Abner whether this was right or wrong according to God's laws. Okay, much less according to whether their laws or their customs at the time. And why? Because again, powerful people have a sense of entitlement, and they also believe that they are invincible, right? They are immune to laws, to rules, to procedures. Okay, all those things apply to everyone else except to them. And we would do well to be careful and mindful when we detect and encounter people like that. All right, because here, not just in the nation or whatever, but when this happens in a church, right, God help us all, because this is something that has to be stopped very early on. Okay? So right now, Ishbosheth is feeling like very helpless. Okay? And he's realizing that Abner might actually be more powerful than he is. And you can see from the way Abner behaves, right? The way he conducts himself, the way his actions and his words, Abner believes that. Okay? But again, we go back to the principle, right? Promotion doesn't come from the east nor from the west. Okay, God is the one that disposes. And so it's going to be God that's going to deal with this situation. God has a way of setting things right. God has a way of overturning things also. And I think the important thing for us to realize is we would do well not to be prideful. And where God has given us maybe responsibility and authority, be careful not to overreach. Be careful not to magnify and think of ourselves as something bigger than we really are. Okay, be careful because it's going to show in the terms of, okay, it's not just in terms of what we say to other people. Okay, and one of the things to watch out for is this. You want to know, you want to see someone show their true colors, right? Look at how people, okay, when they have a lot of power, a lot of authority, okay, what happens? What happens to them? What do they do? Secondly, how do they treat people who are lower than them in terms of status and power? How do they treat them? How do they speak to them? How do they deal with those people? Because you're going to see something about the person. Okay, maybe as a peer, you're not going to see this person show their true colors, but wait till you see how they deal with those people under them. Because it's going to reveal something about their character. Okay, and in terms of how they deal with the weak, the defenseless, right, the poor, how do they deal with helpless animals? All of those things will show you something about that person. Okay, and whether or not we should be dealing with that person, whether or not we should be to have close dealings or a close working relationship or whatever, or to marry that person. Now, all these things are warning signs. Okay, Abner, in all his dealings right now, he's showing that he is not accountable to anyone. Okay, and neither will he be. All right, what kind of person are we? Okay, how do we conduct ourselves? All right, are you and I the same person? Whether in front of the boss, in front of the employer, in front of other people versus when we are in private. Right? Okay, where if no one sees us, do we do things that thinking that we can get away with it because we don't have to be accountable. Right? These are things that only we know for ourselves, but God knows. Okay, God knows, God sees everything. And so the question is, where do we stand? Right? What are we like? Okay, do we have integrity, or are we different depending on the audience that we think is watching us? All right, let's pray. Father, thank you for this time together.